Hello, everyone. I'd like to first welcome our friends from the media for coming at very short notice to this press conference, which I've called to address concerns which have arisen relating to the proposed Ironwood project and the East-West Arterial, the continuation of the East-West Arterial through from the junction at Hurst Road to the junction with Northside Frankstown Road. And the issues which have arisen because the road on its proposed route passes through my father's land at Frankstown, and the dog leg, which would lead upwards to the Shedder project, passes near property that is owned by Minister Tippett's wife and her family. There have been suggestions made by a number of people, including the leader of the opposition, and speculation in the media that somehow, because of this proposed route or routes, that we had, Minister Tibbetts and myself, had something to do with the proposed path of these roads, that we are supporting this project because of the proposed routes. And so, rather than me simply protesting my innocence in relation to this, what I've decided to do was to ask the technical team from the ministry who have been involved with this matter long before we took office to go through the facts as they are. But I should indicate to you that the proposed route or routes of this road were gazetted on the 5th of May 2005. That is before the first PPM administration took office later in May of that same year. So we could not have had anything at all to do with the proposed route or routes. The second point I wish to make with respect to my father's property is that it has 1,100 feet on Northside Road. The last thing it needs is road access. The calculations are that the proposed route of the road will take some 3.7 acres of that property. Not exactly something that is going to increase the value of the property. I believe it's a bit ironic for the leader of the opposition to suggest foul play and lack of transparency when it was his administration, led by him, who actually gazetted the particular route of this road. It is also ironic that someone who is laboring under 11 charges of abuse of office would suggest that myself as Premier, who has had absolutely nothing to do with the proposed route of this road, is doing something that is wrong. I think that is really all I want to say about that at this stage. I'm going to ask the technical team to do the presentation so that you will see and understand how this project came about, or this proposed route of the road came about, also to address some of the issues about the National Trust ownership of adjacent property there as well. We have a copy of the non-binding heads of terms and conditions, or the MOU, which I signed on behalf of the Cayman Islands government some couple of weeks ago. Let me just check to make sure I have the date, on the 27th of February. And we're going to make copies of that available to all members of the media. I will leave that aspect of the press conference until after the presentation is done, because we can then address those concerns which are quite separate and distinct from the issues of ownership of the land through which the road runs. So I have with me on my left the acting managing director of the National Roads Authority, and I'm going to ask him if he would do the presentation. We have it up on the TV monitor, and please feel free to stop him and ask questions as the presentation proceeds.
Okay, well, thank you very much for allowing us to present this afternoon. If you would permit me to just stand while I point out a few aspects of how we came about the alignment. As the Premier suggested, this actual alignment, which what we're referring to now is the extension of the east-west arterial from Hearst Road to Frankstown Road is around 9 miles in length. But I want to give you just a brief background of the genesis of this whole route, and how it came about and how we applied our planning and engineering principles to gazette this route back in 2005. You all will recall Hurricane Ivan in 2004. And one of the things that became very apparent after this major hurricane was that, far be it from any sort of transportation or traffic issues, one of the things that became very apparent was that we had all of these washouts at the island. In East End in particular, we had an area at the East End Village that was impassable. We had areas in Pease Bay that were impassable. We had areas in Bordentown. Bordentown looked like a disaster zone, and it was impassable for many, many days. They had to use the back road, Anton Borden Road. And also we had the issue with the Savannah Gully in the Savannah area, which brought salt water from into a lot of those surrounding neighborhoods. So we got together very quickly with then minister, who was Gilbert McLean, and he asked us to basically look at all of our long-range plans that we had for roads on the island and basically come up with a hurricane resilient type of highway. At the time, he was terming it the Central Highway, and so that sort of then led us then to design something that went sort of along the center of the island, so that it would not only facilitate future growth, but also be hurricane resilient. So then that, like I said, that then became known then as the East-West Arterial. So Central Highway became East-West Arterial. One of the things that I want to point out with this road in particular is that we're referring to the blue central road that runs along in the center of the island. One of the first things that we looked at then was what are sort of the ecological features that we need to avoid? What are the things that we need to be wary of? You will notice in the East End districts, you'll see a series of lines, circular lines, that are hatched. Those are what you call the freshwater lens. So in East End, and North Side in particular, there are two major freshwater lenses. So if you're going to do any sort of major highway, you want to make sure that it avoids that as much as possible. And you can see from the track of the blue line, we've done our very best to stay away from that. The other sort of important factor, well then, what are sort of the National Trust owned lands? What are these types of preserves or reserves that we need to avoid? And that's when we got into discussions with the National Trust. They had two major areas that they wanted us to be cognizant of. One is the Salinas in East End, which is basically just above the freshwater lens there. And then the second one was also the Mastic Reserve, where the Mastic Trail runs through north to south. Yeah. So we looked at that, and based on that information, we also looked at this area in here, which is basically wetlands. Because what we could have done was basically move this road further north and had it go more central, but we were very, in discussions with DOE, we said, look, we don't want to do that. We want to keep this road as far south as possible, but also respecting the quarries, which Tristan is now pointing out right there. And so we left a little bit of room north of that for the quarries to expand in the future. So then you can see then that how that sort of formed the Central Highway or the East-West Arterial as we now know it. Are there any questions on this so far? Because I want to switch to another map so that we can focus more then on the Mastic Reserve. As
Mr. Edwards, are you going to get to the explanation as to why you opted to go against Linford Pearson's original, the road that runs along the bottom, the one that was gazetted in the 90s?
the red road, the red alignment.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Sorry. Okay. As Wendy alluded to, you see as we approach Frankstown Road is basically north to south here. As we approach Frankstown Road, there was two major considerations. One is we have hotel tourist development in East End, and Tristan can point that out. Sorry, no, Colliers. Yeah, so we've got all of the hotels up there and so forth. So from a transportation, traffic engineering perspective, you want to have a road, a major corridor that services all of that for future growth. You will remember also there was also talk about the Mandarin project, the Chinese project in the Northeast, and all that's on the Northeast coast. So you really needed to have something that went in that general direction. Also, then there's also talk about cargo distribution ports and all this sort of stuff, Shetty Hospital and everything. So then that then brought about the red route, the alignment. Also, Minister McLean at the time was talking about extending John McLean Drive and creating a sort of an interior highway. So that then was what created the red alignment that you see right there. One other major consideration, Wendy, is that if you look along Frank Sound Road and you look at the developments that are there, there really wasn't any way or any area for you to bring a major corridor through at 125 feet other than where we actually have it now. And in fact, the red alignment, as you see it where it crosses Frank Sound Road, just manages to squeeze between what is the fire station and the Clifton Hunter High School. So we were just barely able to get a corridor through there to be able to go on to then service those areas of East End. We were just able to, yeah. So we have that preserved, but actually, in order to get that corridor, we have to take land from the Clifton Hunter High School in order to make that possible. Any more questions on that, and then we'll switch to the other map very quickly. Okay, so what we really want to talk now is how discussions sort of ensued with the National Trust, and then sort of where we are now in discussions with them, and what is sort of the way forward as we see it from this point. Just to orient everybody as to where we are again, the yellow is the current gazetted alignment of the east-west arterial. And right where you see the blue hatching and so forth, that is where it intersects with Frank Sound Road. What we did was, in discussions with National Trust, from the beginning, from the onset, they were sort of against this sort of central highway. So what we did was we moved it down away from their properties as much as possible, bearing in mind that, well, let me explain this part first. You see how it sort of takes a kink up and turns onto Frank Sound Road? The reason for that, as I alluded to, was that if you look at the convoluted development in this area, there really wasn't any way to sort of bring this yellow alignment through, continue it along its current path. We had to go up north and avoid homes, avoid quarries, the Powell Quarry in here, and then we had to avoid a major subdivision right here, Rossini Street. So we came up and brought it through where we thought would be best. Whenever we align roads, we don't look at land ownership. We pay no mind to who owns it, whether it's Crown property, private, we don't really care about that. What we look at is sort of the geological features, and we also try to go along parcel boundaries as much as possible so that the take is less intrusive. So a lot of times we'll split parcels along the boundaries and we'll take sort of evenly as best we can from each parcel. So
sequence of events of the trust purchasing their land.
Yes. So as what we want to talk about now is, you see the yellow on this map, all of the sort of lime green, yellow. These were lands that the trust owned at the time that we gazetted the road. So at the time that we gazetted this yellow alignment, these were trust-owned lands. What we have done for everyone's edification is to show that since the gazettal of the alignment in 2005, the trust has continued to purchase or to acquire parcels. And we have shown those here in the red hatching on this map for everyone's benefit. These areas, the areas that Tristan is highlighting here, for example, right here, was purchased as recent as 2011. And this one I think was in 2006 or 7, and this was in 2008. So you can see that these purchases were done long after the road was gazetted in 2005. Yeah.
Mr. Howard, we've seen a similar sort of map from the developers showed us. The question that I have is that the trust has had for some time a sort of I don't know if I want to call it a wish list, but like they had that big area outlined for where all of the land they wish for the master reserve.
Yes.
Some of which they still haven't acquired. Was that known to anyone at the time? I mean, did the NRA, you remember if the NRA knew about this is what they wanted to preserve?
Yes, they had initial discussions with us going back as early as 2006, 7, and what they basically said was in fact, most of the discussions weren't centered around the mastic, but they were centered around the salinas, which is further in the East End area. So we've had general discussions with them over the years. The Salinas project was something where they were trying to reserve lands they wanted to create an iguana habitat for the blue iguanas. And so one of the first things that they asked us to do was if we could move that blue alignment further south so that they could, because they were in the process of acquiring lands and so forth.
But there, in any case, your position is before when you were gazetting this road in 2005, you knew of no plans that they had to acquire these other parcels.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we only go based on what we did was what we generally try to do is we work with DOE and so forth and the environmental people. At the time that, as you can see from the yellow alignment, we respected what we knew were trust lands at the time. You see, so we only just skimmed the bottom of that. In fact, in this position right here, the only reason we touched that was because we were trying to create a buffer between the existing quarry and the subdivision, the private housing subdivision that was there at the time. Yeah. And our position is always this, that, we try to encourage developers if they can come to some sort of happy medium, some sort of compromise where we'll say, well, we're only very nearly just scratching, a bit of your land. Can we work together on this and so forth?
Well, do you think that your plan, your gazetted plan, encouraged them to buy these properties because they thought if the road was built, they wouldn't be able to preserve them otherwise?
I really can't comment on that. I really don't know either way. What I can say, though, is that we met with them just as early as last Thursday, and they have indicated to us that in fact, what I will explain at this point is that what ensued from the discussions that we had with National Trust, and that was they discussed a series of alternate alignments. And the first one of those is actually shown as National Trust Scheme A. And so what they basically said to us was that would we consider shifting this yellow alignment further south, coming along here, going up, very nearly missing the quarry, and then heading down into a private subdivision, use that roundabout that exists in the private subdivision, and then come up. So you can see that that was one idea. So these are their proposals to the NRA. So that's sort of their option A. Option B, what they're calling option B, is the blue or the cyan line. So they basically are okay with this alignment, and then they're asking if we would then extend it along that way, but then you see you would go through a private housing subdivision and then end up at the roundabout as we have it proposed. So that's one of their options as well. And the whole idea behind this is that we don't touch any part of the lands that they have now acquired at this point.
What do you all think of those plans? I'm just looking at them at the moment.
From us, well, let's discuss the cyan, for example. One of the things that we don't particularly like about it is, well, first of all, we got to engineer the curbs and everything. We got to design for speed and everything, so it would have to be a lot smoother than is shown. But obviously then you're going through a subdivision where you have to go then and purchase homes and so forth. And then also, if you look at this major parcel here, this big one, then you split it at a sort of an odd angle. You almost split that diagonally. And then we would have to see how we can get, geometry-wise, the roundabout to work at that intersection, because now you have two roads that are coming together at an acute angle. So all of these factors have to play into that. So we haven't actually done sort of the engineering work on this to see if this alignment can work. Did I discuss all three? Yeah, there was one other option which they discussed, and that was eliminating this yellow portion altogether and essentially coming along here. This is the dark blue now, coming down this other road, hitting Frank Sound, going up Frank Sound, and then continuing on from there to the east. So these are three options that they've given us.
4 lanes,
Yeah, you would widen Frank Sound then to 4 lanes in that area.
front of the school.
Yeah, and of course that would be very difficult because widening 4 lanes here and everything into these private, you would be taking then people's front yards and so forth to make this work. So like I said, these are just fresh ideas that they've given to us as of last week, and we haven't had a chance to really sit down and see how all of this could work.
What else came? Sorry. What else came out of your discussions last Thursday with the trust? This is basically what you discussed. These 3 proposals that they put forward.
Yes, and there was another issue that came up, and that is the Mastic Trail itself, or what's called the Mastic Trail. As you know, it starts here on private land. I think it's owned by the Scots or so, but there's a parking lot. It starts there, and then you actually walk along the trail, and as you can see, at some point, then you would hit where we're proposing the road. So we talked about doing a pedestrian underpass and so forth. We also talked about putting culverts in whatever alignment we come up to, because from what we understand, there is a natural drainage pattern where the waters tends to flow then into this reserve, because this reserve is fed then by natural land flow. So whatever we do, whatever road alignment we come up with, we'd have to make sure that we don't cut off, we don't disrupt that natural drainage pattern. And that was basically the gist of our discussions with them last week.
Sorry, Mr. Howard, can I just go back again to the other road, the one that you sort of said, well, we didn't go with that because we wanted something that went up towards Moritz and there was talk of the Mandarin happening, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, given the circumstances that we are faced with today, which is there is no Mandarin, there is a hospital in East End, the Reef Resort and the Moritz seem to be doing perfectly well without a road. What's the reason why that alternative red route is now being rejected?
Let me first say that the alternate red road is not being rejected in any way, shape, or form, and I don't know if Mr. Tibbetts wants to speak to that. But what we're saying is that if we want to look at the future development of the eastern area, and we talk about Go East and all these other types of initiatives, but what we generally try to do is look at land use, and what we know definitely is that area where Moritz and all that stuff, this is zoned for the higher sort of beach resort, hotel type of development. So we have to think in terms of 20, 30 years down the line that we will need some sort of road, some sort of reserved corridor, so that developers can come and see it and so forth, and that people can then build around that. They're able to plan around that. So we're not in any way or form saying that we will drop that alignment. We're saying that at this point where it's a Section 26 Gazette, we will work with developers as they come forward with their plans, and we will alter the alignment where necessary and so forth. But alter it in such a way that we don't actually eliminate the road, but we can facilitate developments as need be. The red alignment, as we discussed, we think is very important, because that will also, like I said, help to service the Shetty Hospital and any other sort of major development that may occur in that area. Also remember that under the planning law, developers are able to do rezones and so forth, so they're able to increase, to change the status of certain zones in that area. In that area right now, there's probably a lot of agricultural and residential and so forth, but there's no reason, or there's not to say that you won't be able to rezone some of these lands to neighborhood commercial, more hotel tourism and so forth. So we have to always keep that in the back of our minds.
Mr. Howard, you mentioned that you just met with the trust on Thursday with those 3 proposed changes to the road. Have you had a chance to sit down with the developer of the Ironwood to talk about these proposals yet? No,
we haven't. In fact, what the developer from the Ironwood said to us was that he also wants to meet with the trust as well. So he's sort of alerted us to that fact. So
obviously, since he's the one that's going to build the road and cost the road and pay for it, it's up to him what the final say is, I guess. I'm assuming. So what I would hasten to say as well is that the developer hasn't actually seen these new proposals from the trust at this point. And like I said, this is all relatively new in terms of development. To my knowledge, yes. Yes.
Going back to the Mastic Reserve, have you thought about an elevated road going over so it wouldn't actually encroach on it?
Just to quickly say, when I saw where the difficulty was with regards to Mastic Trail itself, in speaking to the developer, he has said very swiftly that he is quite amenable to that. And I think Edward mentioned that earlier on, although he didn't say it in the words that elevated. Right. But I think he was referring to that. Yeah. So they are quite happy. But so that we can get it very, very straight, and I heard what you said, sir, that they're going to build the road. They're not going to build the road.
They're going to pay for it.
Right. Or a large portion thereof. But all of the engineering and all of the other aspects of it, the NRA will be intricately involved in the whole process. And I want to say this other thing too. This is assuming we get past the FFR and the FCO, and there is an arrangement that can be made that satisfies all corners regarding it. So we don't know yet whether it's going to happen. But because we simply believe that it is good for the eastern districts, the type of development that it is, tourism, and the minister is ecstatic for another potential golf course, because all the stats say we need at least 2 or 3 more, not even for any more tourists, but for the volume that we get now. So it is all positive from that perspective, and certainly we respect the fact that there are some obstacles and we need to talk through with National Trust. And I see some of their proposals that they have made, perhaps a little tweak into what they have said can actually make things work. Since we've seen that, since Edward has showed us that between yesterday and today. So I think there's every possibility, if everybody has the right will, to sit down and work all of these things through to get to the point where everybody mightn't be perfectly happy, but compromise would allow for everybody to say, give you a tick, give you a green light. So I think that is possible, but it is important for me to say that the NRA is going to be involved throughout the entire process once we get to the point where the road should be built, whenever that is, if it's a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. If that's the case, or when that's the case, then certainly they will be dealing with it, and it will be open tender process like it should be, and all of our local contractors, whether they are suppliers of aggregate, or whether they do paving, or whether they're heavy equipment, everybody will have the same opportunity to bid to provide some of the work for that. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that.
There's one final bit that I want to add, although I think I've said it before, others have said it. The government endorses this project and fully support the project. The developer has said, and all of the evidence points to that fact, that he or they have relied upon this Section 26 gazettal of this road corridor as the basis for designing this project. The land assembly that they have done and are continuing to do is based on the road taking this particular route. They have made it very plain that the viability of this project is contingent upon the road staying in essentially the same place it is. That doesn't mean they can't be tweaks or it moved slightly. But to completely change the route will undermine the main premise of the whole project. I think it is important that we all understand that. And it is also important for the credibility of the Cayman Islands and our systems, that developers, post-developers, investors, everyone can rely upon what government does in order to plan what they would like to do in the Cayman Islands. That's why we have these gazettals of road corridors and so forth. It provides a basis for the National Trust, for everyone else to understand what it is that government proposes to do, at least in broad strokes. Yeah. So I think it's important that that point is made and understood, that if there's a complete rerouting of this road, the project falls away. What compensation government winds up having to pay to the developer for what they've done is something I don't know the answer to. But they have already raised that possibility.
So basically, sir, just if I may, you're very fond of saying you're a government of inclusion, and you're just basically hearing some of the ideas that the trust might have. But realistically, if all of the dots are hit and all of the T's are crossed and FFR approvals, you could just give them the go-ahead and build it just the way it is right now without any issues because it's already been gazetted. Is that correct?
Well, I wish it was as simple as that, but but we would like to, as I said, we support the project. I'm keenly conscious of, and the government is, of the environmental concerns and issues. But the other point is, I'm going to say this as one whose family comes from the Eastern Districts. We cannot operate on the premise that all of the land in the Eastern Districts is sterilized and kept on the basis of its ecological and environmental value. If government takes that approach, government will have to buy the land. It cannot be fair or right for those who own property in the Eastern Districts to carry the full financial burden of ecological and environmental measures. So if government wants to preserve all of the land in the Eastern Districts forever, government's going to have to pay the landowners for it. That's that's my view and my philosophy about these things. Unlike a lot of the land west of Bordentown, most of the land in Eastern Districts is still owned by Caymanians and Caymanian families. Most of it have been in families for many years. In my family's case, this piece of land we're talking about has been in the family for 150 years. It was a much bigger piece when it started, but that's how things get carved up as the generations come and go. But it cannot be fair to those in the Eastern Districts to have their lands sterilized completely, not be able to do anything in terms of development, purely on the basis that this property has huge ecological and environmental value. If that is the case, then the rest of the country must pay through government to preserve it. It cannot be just the people in the Eastern Districts who bear this significant financial burden. That's my philosophy with respect to these things.
Two questions, one from Mr. Tibbetts, one from Ms. McLaughlin. Mr. Tibbetts, you alluded to how the road will be funded or how a portion of the road will be funded. We spoke with the developer about this to some length, and they weren't really sure at the end of it how this was going to happen. And I know that's partially what you all are discussing with the MOU, but my understanding of it now is the portion that they will fund or cost, they pay up front, the work is done, then they use concessions, import duty, whatever, from the development to recoup the costs? Is that essentially how this is going to work?
Generally speaking, that is the way that they have proposed it. It hasn't been fine-tuned because we don't know by way of the FFR what the UK will accept. But the fact of the matter is they are quite prepared, as I understand it, from them. They are quite prepared to receive the funding, or not to receive the funding, to undertake the borrowing for the project once we know exactly what it is going to cost. In other words, the government is not on the hook for that. Once that is completed, that is assuming we get to that point and everybody has signed off agreeing, then their development, which even under the hotel aids law, which is antiquated but still around, especially up in the Eastern District as an incentive, they would have gotten concessions on their on the import duty for their building materials. They have said, and they estimate that is somewhere between and they're not 100% sure because of the plans are fluid and the whole thing is evolving, but they're saying a minimum of somewhere between $20 and $25 million of concessions that they would then receive by way of import duties on building materials. Over that period of time, as the project is built out, then all of those concessions would go towards paying back the financing that they have arranged. Plus, during the time of development, the government would then, and you will notice in the Ironwood arrangement, in the proposed agreement, which is non-binding, we must keep saying that it is non-binding, but it's a starting point for them. That you will see various methodologies proposed about the rest of the funding being arrived at for the development of the road. The other possibility that cannot be mentioned in an agreement such as this is there are also other developers who have approached the government who want to do certain projects in the vicinity of where the road is going to be once it is a reality, who have said, we would like to do certain developments. The portion of the road that is going to traverse our property, we are quite prepared to build that. Of course, all of those things we don't know. I can't say to the country, or Premier can't say, this is what's going to happen. Others might be like that, but I'm not going to be like that. But all of those things are possible. And once we get going and we can get to that point, then I am confident that some of that will simply unfold. In fact, some of the developments might start to take place before the road is built. So all those things are possible. But the reality is, once the project is built out, then there will be a pretty good portion of the loan already paid off. And the financing will be for the life of the project, which is, I believe, 20 years. And during that time, however the rest is done, whether it is by allocating some of the stamp duties for transfers, which are naturally going to occur, or whether out of the government's capital budget every year they set aside $1 million or $1.5 million to just continue until that is finished, then that could well be the case. And I'm just being upfront. None of that is fully decided exactly how that difference is. But there are a multitude of ways which can be used, which are not a strain, because it's not a whole pile of money one time that you would have to find. Your worst case scenario is your capital projects for roads every year. If you have to cut back a little bit on that and use some of it to pay for that, fine, because you will already have that much road that you didn't have before. So I mean, there is any and every way that you can actually look at making your end game be the way you want it to be. The key to this whole thing is, I believe that we can get an arrangement with the National Trust that is just looking at what they have proposed now. I think we can get that worked around. And if that can happen, and we can get to the point where the UK says, okay, we understand your business case makes sense, because they have already indicated to us that in principle they support the project. It's a matter of determining how it can satisfy everything legally and otherwise to make it happen. But if we can get to that point, I mean, let's be honest about the whole thing. When I say be honest, these people have been talking for 4 years about this project. They've talked to the previous government. It was announced by the former one of the former premiers in a public forum that this was one of the projects they were looking at. So it didn't come. They weren't brand new coming to us. We simply picked up the ball. And having said all of that, we believe that the type of project that it is, because it's not just, in other words, it's a fairly wide expanse. It's not something that's going to be finished in a year, and it includes a golf course, which is very much needed in the field of tourism. That the project itself is a good project, and it will provide a fair amount of activity in the eastern districts, and it complements a lot of things that are happening there as we speak and are intended to happen up there. And why not? Why should we continue down this side and sooner or later we're going to tip the island over if we continue? But I mean, those are my thoughts. So I mean, for those who might say, well, there's a problem with the National Trust and the Mastic Trail and the whole thing should just die because of that, well, that's their thoughts. I don't think like that, and I respect that we should do everything we can. And I don't want to continue. But I'm just saying, you know, I mean, if people are objective in the thought process about the project, they will see the value of the project. And by the way, you didn't show them where my wife's piece of property was so that they could understand where that is.
You didn't show either of them, actually. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's good.
Could you leave that up there for just one second? Because I wanted to ask Mr. McLaughlin one thing. Mr. McLaughlin, one of the proposals I understand Mr. Howard to say about rerouting, potential rerouting, would take the route along the southern route where the road that goes to the Shetty Hospital and then cut back up. What is it? Frank Sound Road there?
Widen the road and go up there.
That's not a major rerouting of I mean, our understanding from talking to the developer is they don't want that.
No, they don't want that.
Okay, so was that really an option, or?
But that is what the National Trust put forward.
Proposal.
That's what they're saying. But I think the best option, to be truthful, since we're talking it, is what color you call that, Edward? That one.
Cyan.
That's cyan colored one.
Oh, okay.
That one, I think, is the best compromise once that is retweaked a little bit so that the engineering process can actually satisfy them that the road isn't badly built with by way of curves and stuff.
Yeah, in other words, putting the Ironwood development is at the golf course on the north side of it rather than on the south side.
That's not the Ironwood development. That's an existing subdivision.
Okay.
That's an existing subdivision.
Yeah.
But
Ironwood is across the road.
Okay.
But putting the corridor to the north of the subdivision rather than going through the subdivision and taking out houses and having all of that and still ending up at the end of the day, if I may say, because this is a thought that has been expressed by some people, that if you, I'm too big, if you move this up this way, something like that, avoid the subdivision. The portion of property here that the government would have to compulsorily purchase could be given back to the National Trust to adjoin their property there so that any little bit taken from here, in other words, they will not have lost any property. That way, they avoid the fight with his father about land because it comes straight by the roundabout. So that.
Well, the only problem with that is I'll then be accused of having rerouted the road to save the 3.7 acres that my father was going to lose.
But I'm only saying, but this is their proposal. So I'm just simply showing you that I believe there are options to be looked at that might well bring about a solution. You have that look in your eye, Wendy.
I do. I've got a very sort of generic question about this entire development. You say it's a good project.
In our view?
I'm wondering what kind of evidence we've got that it's a good project. First and foremost, the idea of a golf course located in that place. A lot of people have already said way too hot for people to play golf in the middle of the island.
Way too what?
Hot to play golf.
Are you telling me it's hot up there than down there?
In the middle of the island, which has been cited by other people. Secondly, there's been no sort of assessment about its impact, about, this idea, build it and they will come. We've got, I understand that right from the very get-go, planning seemed very reluctant to have the DOE involved in any discussions about this subdivision as it rolled out.
planning
Also-
were reluctant for. No, yeah, but Wendy, just hold it now.
Yeah, documents that I've
You
seen
keep
suggest that.
you.
I'm just
yeah,
going to finish my question and
Well,
you can answer.
tell me what you're talking about. I'm responsible
I'm
for
raising
planning.
a few issues because you say it's a good project, so I'm trying to
I'm
find
telling
out.
you my view. Yeah, but you keep going off of these things. And what evidence do you have to say what you're saying?
Okay, several people have talked about the idea that it's too hot to play golf up there because it's in the middle of the island. It's miles away from the ocean, so there's no sea breezes like there are, say, at the Ritz golf course. So it's pretty hot. I mean, I've walked the Master Drive, it's pretty hot. So anyway, but I don't play golf, so thank goodness. So anyway, that's just one question. These are what I'm pointing out is that the DOE has not been engaged at any point in discussions about the socio-economic impact as well as the environmental
When
impact.
the plans are put forward, all of the agencies that are required to give their input will certainly be able to give their input. Let's get it clear now. Let's get it clear. Because I say I believe it's a good project for the island, does not mean, I'd rather you look at me when I say this. I know, but I want you to see my eyes when I tell you this. That does not mean for a second that I would have anything to do to disturb the process, whatever the law requires. So I want to make sure that you understand that very clearly.
I've got one last part of the question because this is another element of the issue.
No, but I want to address that point, Wendy, if I might. We passed out the heads of agreement, non-binding heads of agreement. If you look at it, a number of key things that you must remember. It's non-binding in nature to start with. It is, if you go to page 7, paragraph 5, for the avoidance of doubt, the execution of any such agreement is subject to the following: the Cayman Islands government obtaining the prior approval of the FCO to proceed with the project, which we don't have yet. Completion of a strategic business analysis comprising a business case study and value for money assessment. And C, completion of an environmental impact assessment, which shall be commissioned by the government. The EIA shall identify any possible environmental impacts arising from the project and include proposals for mitigation of same. See, you have at least, Wendy, to give this project a chance to be conceived properly and not abort it before we get anywhere near the point of knowing whether or not the concerns that you have are real. No one is going to spend $360 million on a project that they don't believe has any basis. Investors don't throw money around like that. And the government is certainly not going to go down this road. In fact, we're not permitted to go down this road even if we were so inclined without having done these proper assessments and studies. So all I'm asking from you and others is to just monitor us all you wish, but let's not try to kill what could be an amazing project for the Cayman Islands. Create huge economic opportunities for our people, not just for now, but for the future, without any proper basis, just because it feels good to be critical or you think it's too hot.
Wendy, Arnold Palmer has played in just about every golf course that is recognized in the world. He has come here. He has walked the land. He is prepared to be a part of the project. I'm not going to say any more. He should know whether that's too hot at 84 to play golf or not.
My final part of the question
Yes,
was, do you have any concerns with regards to the principles of the development and their connection to MC restoration, which wasn't necessarily a great success for Cayman?
But it is what it is. It is their project. It is them who will have to convince investors to put up the money. That really is not, I think, a matter for government. If we thought that there was something wrong about them, that'd be a different matter. But the financial viability of the project is something that they are better able to judge, and investors are better able to judge than the government of the Cayman Islands. I want to come back to the agreement, non-binding terms, and to say that the way that this is proposed even though this is non-binding, and even though, as Minister Tibbet said, we are a long way away from reaching the financial terms on which the deal will proceed, it is estimated that the road will cost about $40 million to build. The way that this is going to be financed, the developer will have to find the financing to allow the road to be built. The road will be paid for in large part by the concessions which we grant, concessions with respect to import duty, concessions with respect to stamp duty. But it is also contemplated that the developer themselves will pay part of what is being described as the user fee for the road over the projected period that is necessary to pay off the necessary financing. So government is, and the FCO is pretty dogmatic about this. We cannot go down a road in which the Cayman Islands government is actually on the hook, in the sense that this can be treated as a loan which we are bound to repay. So for those who may seem to have a lack of confidence in the government and the government's ability to negotiate these things, they should take some degree of comfort from the fact that this project, or at least this aspect of negotiating the terms of this project, is very much being overseen by the FCO, who are not only watching but are engaged every step of the way as we move towards being able to negotiate, formal binding terms with respect to this developer.
Mr. Howard, just a quick question. From when it's signed off on and construction starts on the road to when the first driver drives the car on the road, what is the time frame you're looking at?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into, there's different stages of gazetting of the road, and we're at what they call the Section 26 now. So at some point, we'll have to move to Section 3, where the land acquisition and everything comes in. And under the roads law, as you know, there's a Section 6, where we can start, we're able then to exercise our powers of entry. So it's really hard to say. Each project is unique in itself.
But I would think, I'm not trying to answer for Edward, because but I know your question is simply when you start building. That's after you get through all of the other hurdles. I am told, and Edward can confirm this one way or the other, that it'll be realistically somewhere between 18 months and 2 years.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. And realistically, I think that one of the major trust issues has been the Mastic Trail. I think that's why they came up with the yellow diversion there that goes down and down between the school and the firehouse. But with the blue Scion, it's still lane. It still goes through the Mastic Trail. And I'm assuming that would be one of the main, even though they suggested it, it's one of their things. You're talking about the overpass.
Yeah, it goes through a portion of the Mastic Trail that isn't actually owned.
Right. It's on the private land.
This is the point that we've discussed, but it goes through not the original Mastic Trail, but the additional bit that was added to give access to what was the Mastic Trail.
Correct.
So it is of less historic significance, I suppose. I'm speculating now, which is why they would probably propose that.
Just one last thing, gentlemen. I saw a letter that was sent to you all, I think, on Monday from Mr. Bush. Does the release of this MOU satisfy his issues? Do you think?
I don't.
Just give me 1 second.
I'll defer to you, sir.
Please. I don't know if it satisfies his issues, because obviously from the content of the letter, he thinks he still rules the roost. But the facts are that the ministry was directed from the middle of the week last week to release the heads of terms agreement, and with all of this unfolding very swiftly, because there was an FOI request from one member of the media, and when we did the very first press briefing about this project, at that point in time we were just about ready to hand it out, and then it was an oversight and the whole thing was finished. And then after that, everything died away, everybody forgot about it, and all of a sudden this FOI, oh man. So when we got the FOI, we said to ourselves, it wouldn't be fair just to release it to the one request, because that was not the intention from the very beginning. Because Premier and I had discussed it on several occasions, and we had agreed that it wasn't anything to hide. It was non-binding, and once people understood that it was just a starting point, that we were quite happy to release it. So hence, since Premier decided to get the technical people to make this presentation to the media, is why it's happening today and not being sent out to various media houses. And that's just how it went. But the letter, it needs to be made very clear that handing this out is not in response to that letter, by no means. And I just want to say another thing, because it was mentioned earlier on while we were, if I'm allowed to call it, chit-chatting before we officially started. There was the question raised at some point in time about the standards of public life legislation that is in place, and that property that is owned by family, regardless of whether it has any income or whatever, should be reported. Now, as I understand it, because we fill out a register of interest form on a regular basis as representatives, and I'm pretty sure we're current with that. But that form that we know that those of us who have been around for quite some time have been filling out for years, doesn't have any section which refers to reporting properties of that nature. So you just don't think about that. When you're doing your new form, you look at your old one. Is there anything that has changed? Is there anything to be added or deleted? And you fill it out. And I'm just telling you what the motions are. But as I understand it from the chit-chat we had before, those in the Secretariat or the Commission office have not come up with the design for the new form yet, which people like myself, as long as I am here, will have to fill out, which will include all of that. So I don't know how we would have reported that or what would have been done about that until we have these new forms. I can assure everybody that once we have the new forms, I'll fill it out immediately, and I'm sure everybody else will too, all of the elected people. So to say that, I only say this: if somebody hadn't mentioned that piece of property that is my wife owns and some adjoining pieces which her siblings own, which was part of one parcel that has been in the family for 100 and odd years, I wouldn't even have remembered it, because it's that far away from my mind with regards to that. But that doesn't matter to any of you guys, but I'm just saying that. So with regards to that portion of the questions raised, then certainly I would hope that this would spur them on to get the forms, that people like myself can make sure to fill them out properly.
Is there anything else? Everybody happy now?
And when it's hot up there, but it's hot everywhere. Sorry? Whichever way you say.
Without development, this country will die, Wendy.
Tristan, do you have a copy of that?
Copy of what?
That you're showing right now? Okay, can we have that, please?
thought you had discussed all this already.
Not that. Not that I haven't. Yes, I've seen that.
That would be quite handy.
You mean with like what National Trust has proposed and stuff like that? Yeah.
Okay.
You're 1 day behind seeing it. You're 1 day behind us seeing it. Just letting you know.
Okay.
Thanks much.
It's a wrap, as they say.
Just to say that we just realized that in the photocopy, I think every other page we missed a probably double side with the photocopy wrong, so we want to get there and we'll have page one, page two, page five.
Okay. We missed the
Get all the pages for you.
Uh-oh. Yeah. All the even
Oh my
pages.
God! Thank God I didn't leave the room.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.